My name is Makenzie Krocak, and I'm a research scientist at the University of Oklahoma. Specifically, I work at the Institute for Public Policy Research and Analysis. I've been a research scientist at IPRA for almost 3 years, but before that I was actually a graduate student here at OU, so I've been at OU since 2015. So I grew up in the Twin Cities, Minnesota, and then I went to Iowa State University for my undergrad in meteorology. And then I decided to come down even further on I-35, and I went to OU for my master's and PhD in meteorology. So as a research scientist, we do research. So we study how people use weather information to make decisions. That's any type of decision, from the more benign one, like, should I put my coat on today? To the more impactful ones, like, should we be evacuating before this hurricane? Or should we close these schools down for this upcoming snowstorm? So forecasters take in a lot of information. They look at the observations, so what the temperature looks like, how much moisture is in the air, things like that. But they also take into account what events might be happening, especially if they are what we call an incident meteorologist, or someone who is working with a city planner or an emergency manager. Those people really have to worry about the events coming up, and so meteorologists may be asked to focus on a specific point in time or a specific event to really hone in on those details when giving their forecast. Forecasters absolutely consider who their audience is when they're communicating. If it's a partner, like an emergency manager or a broadcast meteorologist that they work really closely with, they tend to know what types of information or what events that person focuses on and is prioritizing. And so they may focus a little bit more on those details. Whereas if they're speaking to members of the public, especially on social media where you're not speaking to one person, they may be a little bit more broad, or they have to cover areas, for example, in northwestern Oklahoma all the way down to southeastern Oklahoma. And in that case, things are a little bit more broad, or they use graphics and things like that to explain what the forecast is and how much uncertainty there is. They might highlight, here are some things you can do right now. Please check back in 2 days and see how the forecast has evolved. So yes, meteorologists definitely take in and consider their audience when they are tailoring those messages. And that's actually something that we study too, is how can meteorologists who may be serving a lot of different populations, how can they quickly understand how to tailor their messages to one audience or the other? So that's something that we actually work on, trying to help develop those strategies and best practices for meteorologists. Yeah, for sure. Actually, a couple of us from IPRA are heading up to Kansas City to do a training for some of the lead meteorologists in the Weather Service. And we do a lot of research, especially on how members of the public receive weather information, understand it, and then respond. And we use that survey information, we do a lot of surveys, we use that data to then come up with those best practices. Part of our job is the data collection and the data analysis, but then another really big part of our job is sharing those results. As researchers, it's really easy to kind of stick with the data and write the paper and stay in our little research world. But that's not going to help meteorologists who are more in the operations realm, who have to go to work every single day and actually use these strategies. So we try to find a balance between doing the work that we want to share and then actually going out and sharing that information with the people who need to know it. So that's actually something that we're working on right now. We develop a lot of presentations, but of course, listening to someone talk about the strategies isn't the exact same as sitting in the forecast chair and actually getting to practice them. And so in addition to some of the survey work that we do, we also participate in what's called the Hazardous Weather Test Bed. And it's essentially a big playground for meteorologists and researchers to try out the new model data, or to try out these new ways to observe the atmosphere, and then to use new tools to try to create a forecast. and they get to then have hands-on experience with that new forecast tool. But we can also go back and look at the tool they made in the test bed compared to the forecast that they made in real life and see whether or not those new technologies and tools actually helped, or if they made the forecasting process more difficult. So we use the test bed as just that, a test bed, a testing ground, so that we can try out these new strategies before, say, okay, go ahead and use it, and then forecasters come back to us and say, that's not good, this is really bad. So in addition to kind of collecting data about the audience, about members of the public or emergency managers, we also work really hard with meteorologists and the practitioners to understand their process as well. We actually don't know to what extent misinformation or bad forecasts are influencing people's decision making. It's actually a project that we're working on right now to really understand how bad it is. It can seem really bad, right? We can be scrolling on social media and be like, ooh, this is really hurting people's decision making. But I don't know that we know how bad it really is yet. So we're trying to figure out just how often decisions are changed by these bad forecasts, for example. With regard to how do we combat misinformation, there's a couple different strategies. One of them is a known good source, so the Weather Service or a local broadcast meteorologist, for example, can go on and say something like, if you see a snowfall map that tells you exactly how much snow you're going to get 30 days from now, that's bad. No, that's not really true. That's someone probably making up some pretty bad information. So if a known source goes out there and tries to give members of the public or an audience a heads up, say, hey, look out for this type of information. It's not very good. We've seen studies show that that type of strategy is really, really helpful. Another strategy is after an event, if something doesn't go as forecasted, so sometimes forecasts are really good, sometimes they're less good, trusted sources can go on there and explain maybe what went wrong. We thought that we would have this much moisture in the atmosphere, and instead, we just didn't get the moisture return we were looking for, and so storms never formed. That type of explanation of, we recognize this didn't go as forecasted, and here's why, that helps build trust in these official sources, which can really then make sure that people go back to those trusted sources next time. Yeah, that's another really good question. And I have a meteorology background, and so I tend to think about these problems from a meteorology point of view. And a lot of times, as a meteorologist, we know what a warning is. We call a warning a specific product from the Weather Service, or the red polygon that shows up on the TV. And oftentimes, when people say it came without warning, what they're really talking about is that they weren't in the mental space to really comprehend what was going on and respond immediately, especially with quick onset events like tornadoes. Even myself, I might get the tornado warning, but it's really hard to get myself to think, okay, I have to get my pets and the rest of my family and all the belongings I probably want to save down into this hole in my garage. That is another step in the decision-making process that people have to go through before they can really get to the point of actually going into shelter. And so oftentimes when people say it came without warning, what it means is that they hadn't made it through the entire decision-making process. As meteorologists, we like to think warning, response, and there's nothing in between. But that's not how humans work. Humans actually need quite a bit of time to comprehend the warning and then trust that it's for them, and then decide what to do and weigh all the options. Okay, I could go into my closet, or I could go into the shelter, but do I need to take that? But have we gotten this out of the closet yet? So they have to then decide what to do and weigh all the options and then actually go and execute it. And for some hazards, you might have a lot of time to go through that process, like snowstorms. It's not like it's gonna snow 10 minutes later, it's snowing and you can't get out of your house. But for other hazards like tornadoes, that's how quick it has to happen. And so I think as meteorologists, we just have to understand that the phrase, it came without warning, oftentimes doesn't mean that you didn't do your job or you didn't give a warning. It sometimes just means that, maybe they didn't have the TV on so that they could get the information right away and make a decision. Or maybe they hadn't quite gotten all their supplies ready. Or maybe the kid was still asleep in their room and they decided, it's not worth waking the kid. So all that to say, it's okay if people say it came without warning. That oftentimes has to do more with how they made a decision, not so much that the meteorologist screwed up. as researchers, we want to put out the best work that we can. We want to be reproducible, so if someone wants to go and do the same study again, they would find very similar results. And we want to make sure that not only are we doing good research, but that the people who are using that research are getting that information and that it's useful to them. As forecasters, something that's really important is to be consistent, to have a process and have a way that you are communicating with members of the public that they are used to. So that, last time I remember when it was bad, the meteorologists were saying this type of thing. And that the next time it's bad, we're saying similar types of things. So consistency is really important. And then when something maybe doesn't go as it was forecasted to, we talk about why that happens. I think that's something that meteorologists, we could all do a little bit better. It's hard to say, shoot, I was wrong, but sometimes saying, well, I was wrong and here's why, and we're hoping to improve our models or improve our observations so that this doesn't happen next time. That explanation, I think, goes a long way. Humans know that the weather is really hard to predict, and most people are really forgiving. One bad forecast isn't going to make them say, I'm never looking at a forecast again. That's not going to happen. So, explaining what went wrong and hoping to try to do better next time goes a long way in maintaining that trust.